Hey, y'all. Welcome to the first episode of the Stay Creative podcast. I'm Jeremy Brady. In our first ever episode, we get a chance to sit down with Genny Davila, a design leader at Vercel. And we talk about many, many creative topics, in particular, what it is to live a creative life. But most importantly, what are the conditions needed for creativity to thrive, for it to grow, for it to flourish? Now, I think a lot of us know that creativity isn't something you just have on demand. It's not a light switch you turn off, you turn on. It just doesn't just happen by just adding water. You need the right conditions. And for Genny, that's a sense of calm, a calm that opens up space and time to discover, to find ideas, to see those revelations hidden in plain sight, to be able to discover new things. And that process isn't just about getting to a destination. It's not about an outcome. It's not about getting to a set endpoint. To start, just to make work, just to build, just to create something out of nothing is enough. So join us as we talk about this topic and more in our first ever Stay Creative podcast. You're listening to Stay Creative, a podcast where I chat to all types of creatives and find out how they're able to stay curious, stay passionate, stay hungry, how they all are able to stay creative. Join me, Jeremy Brady, as we discover old and new ways to stay creative. Hey, Genny, welcome to the Stay Creative podcast. How are you doing today?
Jeremy, hi. I'm doing great. I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
We know you're in Austin today. What are you doing in Austin town today?
Well, today I am avoiding the heat because it's already happening. It's coming in hot, quite literally. And yeah, just sitting here with you and looking forward to South by Southwest is just kicking up.
Yeah.
So I haven't figured out what I'm going to attend or if I'm going to attend, but I'm about to do some research probably after this to see what's happening.
We were just talking about this, just how, so much that city has kind of grown up and become bigger and there's so much to do. But I think one of the things we were just talking about earlier, which is kind of, are kind of similar but different, knowing that you grew up in Texas, grew up in San Antonio, and we were just talking about how you were kind of started really, life in California as a singer-songwriter. Is that, do I have that right?
Yeah, singer-songwriter is what I thought I was going to do.
Where was that? Was that something that you were like, oh, I'm seeing this on TV, MTV, or did you know people? Like, what was the bug that kind of bit you? They're like, oh, this, particular artists you were listening to, like, where did that come about?
I think it came about from what we were talking about, that I was like in a punk rock band when I was in high school, and it was like an all girl punk band. And one of my like band, she was really into Hole, and we were really into like, I don't know, it was just crazy. And I thought that like, I'm going to be so cool. And do you remember like Bikini Kill and Huggy Bear and like the Riot Girl movement? And I was like, yes, this is me. I'm going to be this super cool Riot Girl. And once that punk rock phase kind of left me and I started getting into like singer-songwriter, I just feel like that drive to play music and to like be in bands was so fun for me. And so it just felt like a natural. I don't know that I ever had the goal of like necessarily being a pop star, but it kind of like I just kept growing and snowballing. And then I found myself in California playing some cool venues and doing some cool stuff. And then I was like, Stop. I'm way too shy to be in front of these people. Like I'd have a nervous breakdown almost every single time I'd be on a stage.
What was that like? Literally like just night and day, where in terms of stopping and kind of, was it that the act of like being in front of a crowd that was the thing that stopped you from doing that? Yeah,
I think it was the art of being in front of a crowd. I just was always scared and always nervous. And then I think in the like final, I would do it by myself for a long time. And then I like recruited some band members and bandmates to play with me. And it felt easier because there was other people like on stage with me that I could kind of like hide inside, And then I think the last phase was kind of just like, I got into design. I worked at Volcom and was skateboarding and doing design. And that just kind of became my passion, like my new passion and love. And I started playing like in a country band then with one of my good friends at the time, who's still playing country, Nikki Lane. And watching her go in LA and like watching her level of dedication to it, I was just
Yeah.
like, I don't have that. I don't have that same like passion and spirit.
Oh, yeah, I know. I think I know who this Nikki Lane is. I think I've heard. I think I might have heard some tracks recently.
Yeah.
So interesting just to kind of dig out a little bit of that sort of punk rock ethos. This combination where skateboarding, punk rock, it feels like do-it-yourself culture kids were coming up, and we're just like, when I kind of talk about that, is that kind of for you? Is that like, oh yeah, that's the world I was living in, or no?
100%. Yeah, that's where it was. It's like we were making zines. We were, doing just cutting and pasting everything, wheat pasting posters. Like, oh, it was so fun.
Do you still carry that to this day? And if so, like, how does that show up in the work that you do now in terms of that kind of ethos of like, that you talked about zines and wheat pasting? Like, how does that come up today?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I feel like now talking about it, it like brings this huge smile to my face because I remember how fun and just like it felt like there were no barriers. You just kind of like did what you thought was cool. And it doesn't come up as much for me now. I feel like the world that I work in or in design lately, it's just been like, there are certain goals and criteria and metrics and all of these things come into place that you think about now that I didn't think about then. But there's one thing that I have noticed was this similarity between how I got a start in that and then the natural, skateboarding. And then I went to work at Volcom. And I think I was the first girl in the art department there when I started there. And you know how their design style is, like it's very like pop art, black and white, like all of this stuff. And I think it's really interesting because where I'm at now, at Vercel is like also this like black and white, like we're this monochrome company. And I've really started to draw on inspiration that I had back in that time to see like how I can pull that forward and start to introduce that kind of style and a little bit of that mentality into the tech world because it definitely doesn't exist very much in tech at the moment.
Yeah, that kind of, I don't know if you remember this film. It had a lot of folks that just for me are kind of feel like they're part of that same world, which was Beautiful Losers. It's got Barry McGee in it at Templeton.
Absolutely.
All right. So, there's a sense of that, when you talk about like the datas and the metrics and the, are we hitting our numbers? Is there space? Well, let me ask this a different way. How do you carve out space for that? Just kind of just doing it to make work, to do cool stuff,
Yeah. I've found lately that the times where I feel like I'm really doing that and isn't necessarily in like creating art or, like zines or whatever it is in that like direct sense. But when I found that I'm the most free creating is when none of that stuff is involved. I'm not worried about an outcome. And it's like, if I'm just out shooting photography and like looking at the things I enjoy around me, and I could shoot photography of like something that someone would not even think was cool or pretty or whatever. But it's just more this mindless creativity. When I'm doing that, I also feel when I'm learning a new tool, like a new design tool, I was playing with Spline the other day.
Oh, I love Spline. Yeah,
I
great
know.
3D. So cool.
And I was having so much fun. And there was just like no rules. I'm like, let me put this color on there. Let me put this in. I mean, it looked terrible, like the first couple of things I did. But I had so much. Like learning new tools is where I feel like when I'm doing that, because I'm not afraid to fail or I'm not afraid to not reach a certain outcome, is when I think I feel the most like free creatively.
I mean, isn't that just that tension between being free to kind of explore and then knowing that that is actually where the good stuff is? That's where the good shit is. It's like, I don't know exactly where we're going, but we're gonna get there. And it may not be like right now, it may not be tomorrow. Coming back to just your photography, and you were saying, hey, it may not be something you might be into, but I am. Are you making those kind of editorial choices, consciously, or it's just sort of like, I'm just going to go where this
Yeah,
takes me?
go where it takes me. It is one of the things that me and my partner absolutely like love doing together is going out to shoot photography. And his style is like very scenic and just of things and stuff, but I love shooting portraiture.
Yeah.
So I think that it very much comes to me like I will see something or see a person standing in a doorway or see a person standing where I'm just like, oh, that looks so good. And I want to take that photo. So a lot of the times, like my thing that I love to do is go, because I also am obsessed with coffee. So I love to just go find every coffee shop I can possibly find and take photos. So I get a great coffee or a shitty coffee. We don't know, but there's always something. Coffee shops have like really nice aesthetics these days.
Yeah. I mean, just like the act of being able to go and like, okay, I'm going to go out and do that and just going to find what I find, and knowing just kind of whether that be the changes in coffee. Before coffee was just coffee. Now it's like, wow, there's a rare alchemy that is occurring here.
Yeah.
And I am not sure what you're doing, but it's pretty amazing.
It tastes delicious. Yes.
It tastes delicious. So you were talking about, being in a band and being, potentially nervous and just having a group of people around you. If you are taking portrait photography, right, that can be a bit of an intimate act in terms of the exchange that's happening. How does that, are you doing that far afield? Are you going up and talking to people and saying, hey, do you mind if I, like, how does that interaction, if at all, happen
Yeah,
for you?
I actually feel like it's gotten me out of my shell a ton because of that reason, because there's that, you do have to go and like ask somebody. Sometimes it's from afar, but a lot of times it is. You do have to go ask somebody like, hey, do you mind? Like if I take your picture, it looks really beautiful right here or whatever. And so I will do that. But there's that barrier too. Like you make that initial interaction, and then there's that barrier between like the camera and yourself and this person.
Yeah.
And so I feel like that adds this level of safety and protection for me. And the other thing that I love though is that when you take someone's photo and then you like turn around and show it to them, and they're always like usually fairly delighted, at the outcome.
Yeah.
And that is always like, it's just this like, well, we live in a culture of instant gratitude. So that is kind of a way of getting this like instant gratification of like, hey, I did this art thing really quick and like, here it is. And you love it. And, we're all happy.
There's a certain generosity to that.
Yeah, I guess I wouldn't have thought about that.
Just the idea that, you're taking a moment and recognizing a beauty or something interesting and then having that exchange. We think about, where do your photos end up if they end up anywhere other than on your camera?
They mostly end up on my camera. I thought for a second that I was going to have like a photo Instagram of like just, of photography. And I kept it up for like maybe 4 weeks. And then I was just like, I don't have the dedication to it. It's all those things like where it's just like, I just want to do it because I love it. And usually if I take a great photo of someone and they like it, then I'll like come home and I'll edit them and then I'll email it. Like we'll exchange emails or whatever, and I'll send them to them. But that's the extent of it.
So it's just coming back to, without forcing a connection, it's just like do it to do it. It doesn't
just do it to do it. Yeah.
Doesn't have to be in a frame. It doesn't have to be on the gram. You're just doing it.
Because it makes you happy.
Because it makes you happy. What are other things that, in your creative life that are bringing that level of joy for you?
I think the other things are playing guitar, that I now play to an audience of my dog, which is very non-judgmental. I mean, he loves everything I do, so it's perfect. I hardly will even play in front of my partner because I'm just like, no, don't look at me. This is too awkward. So I love doing that. I love learning new songs. Like I'll just sit here and like pluck away at, the strings or sit on the couch and have the guitar with me and just learn new songs, sometimes terribly, sometimes really well. And it just brings me joy and peace at the same time, I think.
Mm. Yeah, go on.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think that's really it. And then the next thing I think that brings me like creativity and joy at the same time, speaking of animals, is my dog. And going out, especially in Austin, like there's so many cool, like going by the river or going out to the lake.
Yeah.
And I'm such like a nature nerd. Like I feel so at peace when I'm out there and I'm just like watching him play and run. And that's also another weird, dog people. It's like we all talk to each other and you start to talk to each other's dogs. And like before you know it, you have a friend and you're like, okay, cool. And that's like not supernatural for me, but when I'm with my dog, it is. So it's a really great way to have connection and then nature.
Yeah. So finding these ways to kind of maybe some of these barriers that you might have had, but still being able to make and still putting yourself out there, whether that be outdoors, knowing that you've come up in that culture of a certain level of creative freedom, a certain level to it yourself. And today we're on a screen, we're a lot of screens these days. And I'm always curious, especially knowing I know about you and enough to be dangerous in terms of what you do. There's a lot coming at you in terms of noise.
Yeah.
And what's really struck me is everything you've talked about is about clarity, about peace and calm. How much of those pursuits of outdoors and just connecting with your dog or playing guitar, is that a response to kind of the day to day, or would you be doing those things no matter what? Like basically, how are you doing with all the, how are you being creative with all that is coming at you?
Everything coming at. I think it is something that I would naturally seek out regardless of the noise. I think that like I have always looked for ways to find like peace and tranquility and joy in things that I do.
Yeah.
And I think more so now because of the noise. I wouldn't even say that it's more so. Now it's like more intentional. Whereas before it might just like naturally happen or organically happen. Now I have to be really intentional about like taking the time and the space to do those things, because there is constantly this like flow of stuff coming at me. And I'm pretty sure, but I have multiple sclerosis and I was diagnosed, I don't know, it's been like 15 years now. And I think that was also a turning point where you had to really reprioritize and refocus, not necessarily what was important in life, but with MS, like stress is a huge factor, right? That can deteriorate your health. And I work in like one of the most stressful jobs and like positions.
Totally. Okay.
With like crazy deadlines and rapid. And I think honestly, my demeanor in those situations is what has set me up for success. Like my ability to find the peace and like the tranquility and the not like, everything's crazy and everything's on fire. I think it's really actually helped me.
Knowing that we've worked together in the past and, knowing enough about your kind of work history, what have you.
Yeah.
What's always struck me about you is you've always been the calm in the storm.
Yeah.
And I'm very curious about one, do you see yourself as that? Okay. And then if you do, or your ability to kind of process, where does that come from? Or how are you able to put on what I'll call like that psychic, but that shield, that thing that prevents you from maybe getting caught in the undertow of the chaos?
Yeah. Okay. So first question, I don't think that I see myself as that, or I don't think that I ever saw myself as that. I think now that I'm leading a team and I have been told that I am that, and then like recognize when we're in a pinch or when we're up against a wall and like everything's going crazy, and we'll get a team meeting together, and like I'll get everybody rallied, and I realize in those moments where I can see people's like kind of anxiety level lower, where I'm just like, oh, yeah, like I just helped contribute to to that, and to getting us focused, and to getting us like on pace. I don't know where it comes from. I think it's just probably come from necessity, to protect myself and protect my own peace. And honestly, you can't do great work in chaos. Sometimes people can, but I think that you do, or for me, the best like creative work when you have that space to explore, like we were talking about earlier. Like when you have space to explore, you can do the best work. And if your anxiety level is so high, you basically have no brain space. You're not giving your brain space to explore. So like lower that down, and let's create some space, to get creative.
So knowing, you're hearing that now as a point of reflection, that, you're kind of taking people out of maybe, I don't want to especially speak for the folks that you're managing, but just this sort of lizard brain, where we're in reaction, like, okay, what's going on? What's happening? Versus reflective, where you're able to, knowing, just coming back to some of one of the most stressful industries, got to hit these numbers, got to do this, a lot of guts, a lot of so many guts. Who invented all these guts? I want to speak to this person. We need to have a talk about this. Why so many guts? And how do you create intentional space? Because we've talked about for yourself, but how are you doing that for your team? Like, what are the ways that you're creating, I guess, what I'll call a bubble for to things to breathe?
Great question. I'll tell you how I'm doing it. I don't know if it's the right way or the wrong way, but everyone's generally, I think, is fairly happy. And what I really focus on is knowing that, number one, that they need that space and recognizing when they need it. And number two, pushing back and not being afraid to push back on timelines or deadlines. And then number three, like if we have a huge project, I think that my first thing that I usually do is first like ask the questions and set the intentions of the project. Like, what are we trying to do? Where are we trying to move a person from and to, or what kind of feeling are we trying to give? Immediately following a timeline. And when I put the timeline in place, it's not like this rigid timeline that like we must stick to. It's more like, hey, we have 3 weeks and I want you to spend this 1 week like playing and exploring and like doing, and then once we hit that, and like once we've all come together and like created an idea that we can get behind, then I might be like, all right, where's the deliverables? Like, let's get on this. But I think, just always knowing, like I always try to make sure that I build into our timeline that space for people to explore.
Yeah. So focus and intention.
Yeah.
To do that. Knowing that you've created those spaces for yourself and then you've done that for your team. And, we talked about, just being in front of crowds and being in, playing in front of our dogs, There's also the responsibility and not to put too much of the heavy weight on this, the accountability for you, for your team. And I'm not just talking about like the numbers, there's the, you're the last line of defense in a lot of cases for that space. I would imagine that, well, I don't want to assume, does that space and time to create for your team to play, does that create stress for you?
Yes, absolutely. Only because I feel like on the other side of things, I'm so adamant about creating it for my team, but there isn't necessarily, when you're in a big company or small, whatever, and when you're in a company that has goals to reach, and other teams that are moving really fast, or other teams that have different responsibilities and like different expectations of what your output should be. I think that it causes stress for me because I'm having to constantly like push back and defend our time. And trying to find that like middle ground of like, how can I get you what you need, and how can I get my team the time that they need to do the best work? Because if we have this quick outcome, or this quick output, which is desired, and it's not effective, then we've kind of just wasted time. And so I think the stress is in finding that middle ground of, how can we reach these goals? How can I make people happy? Realizing that I may not always be able to make everyone happy, but how can we find that space or that sweet spot where everyone's kind of getting what they want, and we're being effective?
So what I'm hearing is the value of creative and what is necessary for good creative to happen. You might be talking to people who may not see themselves as creative or may not necessarily value, maybe in the same words that you might use, of creative. So what happens when you encounter that, where you might be having someone who's like, oh, you speak Klingon, or you're speaking a different language, or just, or just a different vibe. How do you negotiate that with someone who may not understand or necessarily, I don't want to say appreciate, all that goes into making good work?
Oh man, the hard question. I don't know. Do you have the answer?
Well, that's kind of what that is really part of what this little corner of our internet is about, is people kind of going at that and going, I don't think we have the answer for that, but we have maybe together some clues that we could figure that out.
That we can help. Yeah. I think I definitely don't have it figured out, and it's definitely a work in progress. And I think that every time I come into a situation like that, I may try a different tactic to just kind of see what works and what doesn't, what clearly does not work. The thing that I have found that helps the most is bringing your stakeholder or whoever it is along with you on the creative journey. I think there is a creative person in all of us. Some people is the way they style their hair, or the way they do their makeup, or the crafts they make for their kids going to school, whatever it is, that's all creativity. And so I think naturally we all enjoy being on a creative journey. And so I think the more that you can bring your stakeholders along with you, and help them feel like they're a part of the decision making and a part of the reasoning of why you're creating what you're creating, you tend to get faster buy-in and less pushback in the end with the final result.
You hear that, stakeholders? We love you. We want to hang out with you. You're cool.
Love you. Come, you can definitely sit with us.
Yeah, you are. There's not a cool kids table. This is a table. We're all chilling. We're all hanging. We all want to be together.
What's so funny is I feel like a lot of times at companies, when design enters the building, people are always like, oh, the cool kids are here. And I'm just like, if you only knew, we'll take it. We'll take it. You can call us cool, but if you only knew the anxiety that we carry.
Oh my gosh. Well, yeah. If you knew what my high school life was like, you would not. Right. Would just me when I leave here. Speaking for myself, ultimate dork, just dorking out and nerding out and stuff.
We're all just nerds. Yeah.
I don't have an answer for that per se, but I will tell. I think it's okay if I tell somebody else's story in this, and so there, apologies, David, we actually have never met. This guy named David Butler, who used to work at CNN. Okay. And David went from CNN to Coke. And I think I have this story right, which is, okay, so people are like, you're going to Coca-Cola, giant corporation, literally red tape, everything is red. You're how are you going to make the bottle hasn't changed in 100 years. What are you going to do? Yeah. That's going to be radical and new? How are you going to bring design into that? And I think, what may be kind of commonplace now is David, as I understood it, refused and edited out all his language about design when he spoke to people. He found the lexicon, just the way that folks talked, and mimicked that and said, okay, I think all of us, we all have these things that are just generally unfulfilled needs. And so how do we just have that compassion? We're talking to you, stakeholders. Yes. And how do we go no, I'm not trying to get something that, whatever it is, pretty pictures or something looks decorative. I'm here to solve your business problem.
Yeah.
And I will use the language that you understand because this is the world you live in, and then act as a translator. So the design team is set up to have the space and the opportunity, but it's headed towards a goal that people are seeing the value of design because there's enough connected dots here of how I'm looking at it, whether about moving XYZ units. So long story long, that approach allowed for him to redesign Coca-Cola bottles and create all these great partnership with artists and illustrators. And, so how do you understand the language of business, and how do you then bring that to your, all those opportunities to your team so they can have the best, again, coming back to where you're at. So intention. Again, I don't know if that's easy for me to say, easy for me to copy and paste a story. It is super hard to do.
So hard to do. But I mean, I think it makes perfect sense. It's almost the same as like, in a way where I was saying like, let's bring them along on the creative journey. But if what you're saying or how you're talking about things is not resonating or connecting, then like there's really no point. So you do kind of have to learn how to adapt and like speak the language that makes sense to them. It's really hard to do. I mean, as a design leader, like I think you work, especially me on like a brand design team, like you work across so many different functions. And so it's like, do I, to constantly have to change or learn or like adapt? I feel like it's definitely something I could learn and improve on, because it probably would help me greatly.
Well, it's a moving target, and I think that, trying to get better at that. I want to come back to the one thing as we, kind of get to the top of the hour here and wrap up, which is, what struck me is just some of the themes around creating space, our creative life that doesn't happen just at the end of 5 o'clock from 9 to 5, whether it be photography, whether it's playing guitar, whether it's kind of bringing that do-it-yourself ethos into it. There's just the culture moves. It's a living thing. It's moving, and it's probably, I don't know if it feels this way to you. It does for me. It's moving very quickly in terms of what's happening in fashion, what's happening in pop music, what's happening in design overall.
Absolutely.
How are you, I guess, actively tapping into that, or how do you sort of self-select or edit the things you do tap into, so that you are in the now?
In the now. Yeah. Well, I will say I constantly feel like I'm not in the now because of how fast it's changing.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a couple of things that I try to focus on. I try to focus on like a big picture. So I might do, just like some research of like what is happening now, like what is new. But I don't like want to overwhelm myself. And I think I can get so quickly overwhelmed with things. So I usually will pick like, if there's this new tool that when I was reading about it, like I think these are all kind of like gut feeling things, where if like you're reading about this and you feel in your gut like connected to, this is cool, or I'd love to explore this. Those are the areas where I'll pick to learn on. But I know that I won't ever be able to know all of the new stuff. I won't be able to connect with it. I won't be able to be good at all of the new stuff.
Yeah.
So like, let me just pick what resonates with me and kind of like go that way. And I feel like, on a team, it's very much the same thing. Like I encourage my team to like find that thing, that resonates with them and that they love to do. And it's even in the work that we do. I'm just like, do you like to do that? I'm going to try and give you more of that kind of work. Not always, but
Well, that's such a, just for yourself, but also for your team, just coming back to creating space and opportunities for folks, which is, something, that's an interesting space for me. And knowing you've kind of made that shift, I think it's arguably even, titles. I don't care about titles, but like titles withstanding, kind of moving from what the corporate world calls individual contributor to being a leader. And you're talking about hey, there is a stress in creating that space and then creating, the things that you have to take, as well as also creating those opportunities. What do you derive from doing that? What do you derive? What, if anything, do you take away from?
Oh gosh, I don't know. Like, what do I derive from like the difference between being an IC to like being a leader and like the changes? That's so hard. I think the one takeaway that I have is that for me personally, I love managing people and I love watching them grow and being a part of like helping people achieve and obtain and,
Yeah.
learn and whatever it is that they need. Like whether it's someone like a designer that needs to learn some more of the, left brain type, like organizational stuff. It's like, I will push you to do that thing to make you more well-rounded. Or if you need to learn something new, like I'll push you to do that thing to, or if we need to share our work more, like let's push to do that to like bring more attention to the work you're doing. And I think I've just really learned that designers as a whole, we just require, I don't know what it is, but we just require that nurturing and that attention and that space, really the space to be creative. Because if we don't get it, and I don't even know if this is just designers, I think everyone, but if like we don't give ourselves that time and that space in our jobs, in our lives, and whatever it is, then like that we can't do our best work. And I think that is my goal. Moving from IC to leader is like, and an IC, I understood what the things I needed were that I wasn't getting sometimes in, positions. And now I just try to implement that and say like, well, maybe I can deliver this for my team. And also what's been a hard lesson is also learning that like what worked for me doesn't work for everybody else. Like I'll be like, well, but I did this. And it's like, well, yeah, Genny, but hey, that's not going to work for this person. So figure something else out.
The one size fits all, or
such a hard lesson to learn.
And I personally speaking, I'm always feeling like I'm relearning that lesson, or just reminding myself of that. And I think just to, as we kind of head out here today, I think for me, the space, the intention, the ability to play and balance that with also like, there is some seriousness to this. Like, there's some adult stuff to do.
Metrics, Jeremy,
metrics. Nothing gets me more excited than looking at an analytics dashboard. No, it's important. Those things are important. They're very important. They're very important, but not forgetting to play. I mean, I think we kind of covered this, but this is sort of a question I like to ask anybody I'm chatting with as part of this podcast, which is just, if there were just one thing that you would have someone who's a creative, just advice that you would give them, like, here's just something to take with you to stay creative, what would that be?
Yeah, it would be obviously take the space and take the time to play. It would also be that like not all of your ideas have to be your best idea, and not all of your designs have to be your best designs. I think as a young designer, there were times where I would just iterate and iterate and iterate and iterate, like one pixel to the left, one pixel to the right, make this big, and it's just like, you have to stop. You have to find a stopping point, and you have to be okay with not making like perfect things all of the time. There's a time and a place for it. But when you give yourself the space to like not make something perfect and just put a color on a paper or a line or, whatever it is, I think that that's like kind of what inspires the play. So
yeah, fuck up a little bit, people.
Fuck up a little bit or a lot, like, whatever it is, like that's how we learn and that's how we get better. So,
well, thank you, Genny. Thank you for unpacking kind of your life and how to stay creative. And I'm thankful you're on the show and better for it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jeremy. This was super fun. I was very nervous because we've talked about it. I'm scared. You made it really, really great, and I really appreciate it. Can't wait to see more.